Hi there everyone. So this is the video for lesson 8 of Treasure Island. We're going to start by previewing the vocab words and then reading a new chapter. And then we've got some workbook pages to do, like a short one, and then some writing. We're going to start reading our introduction to our adventure story. So that's the plan. Let's get started. The vocabulary words are on page 61 in your workbook. So let's look there first, please. Okay, zoomed in, ready to go. There are 8 words. Convenient because it is lesson 8. 8 words. So the chapter we're reading today is called The Man on the Island. I think we're on chapter 5. First word is outlandish. And it's an adjective. Sometimes I think you guys act outlandish. It means odd, unusual, and bizarre. No offense, just kidding. So outlandish is like strange, unusual type of behavior, okay? Next word is dell. That's a noun. It is a small secluded valley with trees and grass, okay? Next word is treacherous. That's an adjective. It means dangerous or difficult to handle. So, like maybe something on the island is going to be treacherous and dangerous, or maybe some of you might have found yourselves in treacherous situations. Some of you guys have some scary hobbies. Next word is shipwreck, and this is a verb in this case. It's not a thing, a shipwreck. It's like an action. If you shipwreck, it means you are causing a passenger or crew member to experience the destruction of a ship. So shipwrecked is how we're going to see it. Next word is desolate. Kind of looks weird, but it's desolate. It's an adjective. It means lacking people, plants, and animals, and other things that make a place feel welcoming. So like a empty, remote, barren kind of area, so nothing happening. It's not a welcoming place. There's not, nice lush forest or animals or people, nothing. Next word or phrase, I guess, is Union Jack, and that's the official flag of Great Britain. So we know that the pirate flag, the skull and crossbones one, is called a Jolly Rogers. The Great Britain, like the England flag, is called a Union Jack. Okay, next word is stockade. It's a noun. It's a barrier made of upright posts used for protection or defense. So kind of like a wall just made out of big posts, like logs almost, and it's to protect or defend something, a stockade. Last word is scout, and that's a verb in this case. It can be used as a noun also, but to scout something means to explore an area to find information about it. So somebody might go ahead to scout something out, to check it out before like the whole group goes out, okay? All right, so those are our vocab words. We are reading chapter 5. It begins on page 44. It is called The Man on the Island. So when we left off, chapter 4 was, in the apple barrel. Jim was hearing Long John Silver here tell the other guys about their pirate plan to, once they all find the treasure, then they'll take over the ship, they'll have a mutiny, and maybe possibly kill Jim, Captain Smollett, Dr. Livesey, and Squire Trelawney, and all the other good guys. So they get to the island, and then some of them take the lifeboats, or I forgot what they call them, but they're basically lifeboats, and head to the island. And some of them stayed on the boat, or on the big ship, the Hispaniola. But Jim snuck onto one of the lifeboats, and he is following and kind of watching what the pirates are doing on the island, okay? So we left off, and Jim was exploring the island. So that brings us to chapter 5, The Man on the Island. And it is a little bit of a shorter chapter. It's not quite as long as the ones we've been reading. Okay. All right, so either track with me as I read it or fast forward the video and read it by yourself. Then once we get to the workbook pages, resume the video. All right, here we go. At first, Treasure Island seemed a fascinating place. There were marshes full of willows and odd, outlandish, swampy plants and trees. Here and there I saw snakes, and one raised its head from a rock and hissed at me with a noise not unlike that of a spinning top. I explored for a while until I wandered into a thicket of live oak trees, which grew along the sand. Suddenly, a wild duck flew up into the air, followed by another, and soon, over the whole surface of the marsh, a great cloud of birds hung screaming and circling in the sky above us. I guessed that some of my shipmates must be drawing near. I listened and heard voices, faint but growing louder. I got down on all fours and crawled until I could see down into a little green dell beside the marsh, closely set about with trees. There, Long John Silver and a seaman named Tom stood face to face in conversation. It was clear that Silver was testing Tom, trying to find out if he would join the mutiny. "I'll not be led away," said Tom. "I'd sooner lose my hand. If I forget my duty—" All of a sudden, he was interrupted. Far away out in the marsh arose an angry roar, then another. Tom jumped at the sound, like a horse pricked by a rider's spurs, but Silver winked not an eye. He stood resting lightly on his crutch, watching his companion like a snake about to strike. "John," said Tom, "what was that?" "That?" said Silver with a treacherous smile. "Oh, I reckon that was Alan." Then Tom seemed to understand everything all at once. "Alan!" he cried, fearing the worst for his friend. "Well, John Silver, you're no mate of mine, and that's a fact. I'll have no part in your mutiny." Okay, we're gonna pause. So a lot just happened there, but it was kind of like unsaid. They didn't really explain everything. You have to infer what's happening. So, back on this page, Long John Silver, bad pirate guy, is trying to convince this guy named Tom to join the bad guys team. And Tom is saying, "I'll not be led away," so it means like you can't convince me. And he said, "I'd sooner lose my hand," so it means I'd rather you cut off my hand than me be a pirate. Okay, so Tom seems like a good guy, but then all of a sudden he's interrupted by an angry roar and then another. So these roars, I'm guessing, are just like the people on the island yelling, and Tom is like surprised by it, but then John was like, "Oh, it was probably just Alan." And Alan was Tom's friend, so Alan was another good guy. And now it says fearing the worst for his friend, so I'm guessing that some of the other pirates were also trying to convince Alan to join their mutiny, and he said no, so maybe they attacked Alan? I don't know, we'll see. But Tom ended up saying, "I'll have no part in your mutiny," so he doesn't want to be a part of the team, the bad guy team. Okay, let's continue. With that, the brave fellow turned his back on the cook and set off toward the beach, but he was not destined to go far. With a cry, Silver seized the branch of a tree, whipped the crutch from under his armpit, and sent the missile hurtling through the air. It struck poor Tom right between the shoulders in the middle of his back. His hands flew up. He let out a gasp and fell. Okay, so Long John Silver is like hanging onto a tree and threw his crutch at Tom. That's rude. And remember, Jim Hawkins, little kid, is watching this whole thing go down. I felt faint. The whole world seemed to swim before me in a whirling mist. When I gathered my courage to look again, I saw Silver standing next to Tom, who was motionless on the ground. A moment later, Silver pulled out a whistle and blew upon it. I guessed he was calling out the other pirates, and I was worried they might find me. I crawled out of the undergrowth and ran as fast as I could. It was all over for me, I thought. I would be captured by the mutineers. Bad guys. Okay, 46. I ran without knowing where I was going until a new alarm brought me to a standstill. With a thumping heart, I saw a dark, shaggy figure leap behind a tree trunk. Was it a bear or a monkey? I could not tell, but I was afraid because I was now cut off on both sides. Behind me were the ferocious pirates, and in front of me, the lurking creature. The figure flitted from trunk to trunk like a deer, but it ran on two legs like a man. I was tempted to cry for help when another sighting reassured me that the creature was indeed a man. I took some comfort in the discovery, and in the fact I had just remembered I carried a pistol in my pocket. I put one hand on my pistol and took a few steps forward. At that precise moment, the man leaped out in the open, threw himself on his knees, and held out his hands as if begging for mercy. I could see that he was an Englishman like myself, but his clothes were old and tattered, and his skin had been burned by the sun. In fact, his bright eyes looked quite startling on a face so burned. Okay, pause before we start learning about who he is. So this guy, like creepy shaggy guy, is hiding and then jumped out in front of Jim Hawkins, who has a pistol, and Jim says that he was an Englishman, so he was a white guy, not from the island, and his clothes were old and tattered, and he is so sunburnt that his white eyes look like startlingly bright against his red sunburnt skin. Okay. "Who are you?" I demanded. "I'm Ben Gunn, I am," he replied. His voice sounded like a rusty lock. "I haven't spoken with a man for 3 years. I'm surprised I still know how to speak." 3 years?" I cried. "Were you shipwrecked here?" "Nay, friend, I was marooned," said he. So, nay means no. So Jim asked if he was shipwrecked, so if his ship landed there on accident and broke, and so he's stuck there. But Ben Gunn, this shaggy character, says, "No, I was marooned." Remember, marooned is an old vocab word. We read it in a previous lesson. It means he was left there to die. I had heard the word, and I knew it stood for a horrible kind of punishment common enough among buccaneers. It was my understanding that when a person is marooned, he is abandoned on a desolate island with not much to rely on other than his wits, so his smarts. Page 47. Here is Ben Gunn and Jim Hawkins looking very sassy. Nice shoes, Jim. All right. "Marooned 3 years ago," continued the man. "I lived on goats, berries, and oysters, but my heart longs for English food. At night I dream of cheese." All this time he'd been looking at me and smiling. He seemed to take a childish pleasure in the presence of a fellow creature. So this guy looks like very happy to see Jim, is what Jim is describing. And like, if you were stuck on an island by yourself with nothing, wouldn't you be pretty happy to see somebody after 3 years? "What's your name?" he asked. "Jim Hawkins," I told him. "Well now, Jim," he said, "if I ever get back to England, I'm changing my ways in the company I keep. I'm a changed man." Page 48. "And Jim," he continued, looking around and lowering his voice to a little more than a whisper, "I'm rich. You'll thank your lucky stars, you will, that you was the first that found me." Then a shadow passed over his face, and he took hold of my hand and raised one finger threateningly before my eyes. "Now, Jim," he said, "tell me the truth. Is that Flint's ship you came on?" "No," I replied. "It's not Flint's ship. Flint is dead, but we have some of his men with us." "Not a man with one leg," he gasped. "John Silver?" I asked. "Yes, that were his name," he said anxiously. So Ben Gunn, new guy, knows John Silver, but he seems nervous about him. After talking with Ben Gunn for a few minutes, I no longer feared him. In fact, I told him the story of our voyage, and he heard it with the keenest of interest. Well, he said, you and your friends are in a pinch, ain't you? Well, never you mind. Just put your trust in Ben Gunn. But tell me one thing. Is this squire of yours an honest man? Yes, I said. Suppose I gave him a share of my money. Do you think he would let me sail home with you? He asked. I'm sure he would, I replied. He seemed greatly relieved to hear this. Well then, he went on, I'll tell you my story. I was on Flint's ship when he buried his treasure. He went ashore on this very island with 6 strong men. They were ashore nearly a week and left the rest of us on the ship. Eventually, Flint came back, all by himself. There he was, and the 6 men, all dead. How he done it, not a man aboard could make out. Billy Bones was the mate back then, and Silver was also part of the crew. Okay, pause. So we're learning a lot. Ben Gunn was part of the crew with Captain Flint, Billy Bones, the guy he was called Captain, remember in the very beginning, came to the Benbow Inn, and Long John Silver. We're all part of Flint's crew. Then, 3 years back, I was on another ship and we sighted this island. Boys, said I, this is where Flint buried his treasure. Let's go ashore and find it. 12 days we spent looking for it. Then the others gave up and went back aboard. As for you, Benjamin Gunn, says they, here's a musket and a spade and a pickaxe. You can stay here and find Flint's money for yourself. So, 3 years after Flint buried his treasure, Ben Gunn found the island again with a new crew, and they marooned him on the island. Rude. Well, Jim, that's my story. Now be a good lad and run and speak with the squire. Tell him I know this island like it's my own. How am I to get back to the ship? I asked. You can use my boat, he said. I made it with my own 2 hands. I keep it under a white rock along the shore. Then, quite suddenly, we heard the boom of a cannon. They've begun to fight, I cried. We stayed together in the undergrowth, unaware of time passing, listening to the sound of cannon and pistol fire. Eventually, I decided I should make my way toward the anchorage. Ben agreed to accompany me. At some point along the way, we spotted a Union Jack fluttering above the trees. That must be your friends, said Ben Gunn. It can't be, I said, stunned by the sight of the flag. They're on that ship. That must be Silver or some other mutineers. Okay, so back on the ship, there's fighting, pistols, cannons. Doesn't sound good. Not likely, said Ben Gunn. In a place like this, where nobody puts in but gentlemen of fortune, Silver would fly the Jolly Roger. You see, Jim, just over that hill is an old stockade. Flint built it many years ago. I reckon that your friends have retreated to the stockade and Silver has the ship. Well, I said, if it really is them, I should try to help. So, off the ship, up on the island somewhere, there's a Union Jack, the British flag, okay? And Ben thinks that Silver and the pirates now took over the ship and that his friends, Dr. Livesey and the squire and stuff, are hiding on the island somewhere. And Jim wants to go help them. I'll not go with you, said Ben, not till I have an opportunity to meet with the squire in private. If he wants to talk, tell him where he can find me and to come with a white flag to show he means well. At that moment, a cannonball came whizzing through the trees and tore up the sand, not 100 yards from us. I ran one way, and Ben Gunn ran another. After parting with Ben Gunn, I decided to assess the situation. I first went to check on the Hispaniola. I saw she was still anchored in the same place, but now she was flying the Jolly Roger. It seemed that the pirates had indeed taken over the ship. Next, I scouted the shoreline. I spotted a big white rock, and I figured it must be the rock beneath which Ben Gunn hid his boat. Then I made my way through the woods until I came to the stockade, a plain log house surrounded by a tall fence. I saw that Ben Gunn had been right. My friends were in the stockade with the Union Jack flying above them. I called out to them and was warmly welcomed. They told me their story, and I told them mine. When fighting broke out on the ship, they had decided they would be safer on the island, so they escaped in 2 of the landing boats with some guns and supplies. They had heard about the stockade. When the pirates saw them rowing away, they fired on them from the ship and then attacked the stockade. Old Red Ruth had been killed, and another of our loyal men, Gray, had been injured. Uh-oh. After telling my story, I had a chance to look about me. The stockade was made of trunks of pine. Near the door of the stockade was a little spring that welled up and provided fresh water. There was a small chimney in the roof through which only a little smoke found its way out. The rest stayed in the house and kept us coughing. If we had been allowed to sit idle, we should have all fallen into the blues, but Captain Smollett divided us into watches. So Captain Smollett divided the group into like teams, and they're gonna be like watchmen, like on lookout. The doctor questioned me about Ben Gunn. Do you think he's sane, Jim? I'm not quite sure. He seems a little strange. Well, said the doctor, you can't expect a man who has spent 3 years on a deserted island to be as clear-minded as you or me. We had very little in the way of supplies, and the captain was worried. He thought our best hope was to get the better of the buccaneers. They had lost 4 men, and 2 others were wounded. Okay, so now the teams are getting smaller. Some of the buccaneers, the pirates, were killed or wounded, but so were some of the good guys. And then down below there's a picture of the little cabin and the stockade. I was definitely in my head picturing a better fence than that one. I think in real life the stockades are probably a lot taller than that, because I mean that fence isn't really going to keep anybody out. And on the bottom it says, the caption says, on an uninhabited island like the one on which Captain Flint buried his treasure, a stockade, usually built by staking tall wooden fence posts into the ground, provides a structure for protection or capture. In Treasure Island, the stockade provides a barrier to slow down the mutinous attack. Similar forts could be used to hold prisoners as well. Okay, and that's the end of the chapter 5. Okay, so I'm gonna put my bookmark in for our next chapter, and we're moving on. That was an action-packed chapter. So we did meet a new character, so we need to go back to our character chart. It is all the way back on page 6, right here. This is the back of the character chart that we had started. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay, so we started this a while ago. We started on page 5, but we had already met and filled out all those characters. So, new character, Ben Gunn. Okay. I guess we can add more about Long John Silver, though. We know more about him now. Pirate. Takes over ship. Wants the treasure. Okay. But we did meet a new character, Ben Gunn. That was chapter 5 we just read. He was, how do we describe him? He was part of Flint's crew, right? Way back then. Part of Flint's crew. He was marooned on Treasure Island, so he was left there to die by a different crew because he couldn't find the treasure. He was sunburnt and shaggy and wild looking. He said he was rich. I wonder if that's because he already found the treasure or because he was rich before. We'll just say, says he's rich. Because we don't know if he actually is or not. Wants to get back to England. For the cheese. Probably other reasons too. Okay. If you guys can think of anything else, you can add it to the box. I feel like that's a lot about one character already. We only just met him. But he was an interesting character so far. So, if you think of anything else to put in the box, let me know. Wish we were doing this together because you guys usually remember some good details that I'm forgetting. We make a good team, but oh well. Okay, so leave my bookmark on this page so we can flip back to it to add more and to later fill out something about this character. So back to our lesson 8 pages in our workbook. Vocab was on page 61, but we're starting on page 63. Okay, so again, we have comprehension questions about our chapter. So chapter 5, pages something to something. I think it was 44 through 51. Okay, so it was not as long as the other chapters, but you have 4 questions to answer about this chapter. So keep your reader out. You are going to answer these 4 comprehension questions using evidence from the text and citing what page number you found your answer on. Okay, I'll read you the questions, but I'm not going to be answering them for you. This is so I can tell if you understood what we read. So, number 1, how does the reader know the exchange between John Silver and the seaman Tom takes place? Why is the interaction important? Okay, I'll explain this one a little bit. How do we know that John Silver and Tom were talking? And why is their conversation important? So remember, Jim was hiding and heard some information. That's how we know. Okay, I give you help with that one. Remember page numbers. Number 2, what do you think Ben Gunn means when he says, if I ever get back to England, I'm changing my ways and the company I keep? So that means like his friends, who he hangs out with. But why would he be changing his ways and his friends? What do you think he means by that? And what page number is that quote on? Okay. And then on page 64 are the other 2 questions. Do you think Ben Gunn is a trustworthy character? Support your opinion with evidence from the text. So, do you think we can trust him? Do you think Jim can trust him? Why or why not? And wherever you get your evidence from, wherever you support your opinion with, write down the page numbers. And number 4, based on what you've read, would you characterize Buccaneers or pirates as trustworthy or untrustworthy? Why? So, do you think the Buccaneers, or pirates, they're called, do you think the pirates are trustworthy or untrustworthy? So, can we trust them or can we not trust them? Why or why not? And page number. So you can pause the video now and answer those 4 questions if you'd like to, or you can do it at the end. Either way, you need to answer just those 4 questions. I'll explain the rest of our lesson though. This is a take-home page. This is optional. You will have already answered these 4 comprehension questions. You have to do those 4. But then this one, this take-home page, I'm going to make it optional because you guys just did a lot of writing and explaining with the comprehension questions over here. So optional if you want to read the excerpt and then answer this question and the one on the back. Go for it if you don't want to. Oh, and there's number 3 over here. And number 4 and 5 and 6. Oh my gosh, okay. If you get bored, all of that. So 8.3, take home, pages 65 all the way through 70 are optional. You do not have to do them. If you want to do them, please do, because it helps, right? It's important optional work. If you want to improve your reading and writing skills, I would do them. But that was a lot of work too. These 4 that you have to do, the comprehension questions, is just extra. Okay. Last part for this lesson, we have to write the introduction to your adventure story. So this is a rubric of it, and I'll explain it in a second. But I want us to go back and look at this page. So in lesson 7, you guys filled out this brainstorming page on page 57. Right now we're writing our introduction, so that's when you introduce your main characters and the setting of your story, okay? And on the next page was the shape of a story page. This part where the very beginning of your story is your introduction. So like the first paragraph in your story. That is what we're working on today. Okay. So this is the rubric. This is what we're grading for your story. We've seen rubrics previously in the year. I've shown you guys rubrics before for your writing. This one just has a lot of information on it, okay? There are 4 parts on the rubric. Here's the introduction to just this part. This is the body of your story, so the main part of your story, the chunk of it. The conclusion is just this row, and then language is all of this. So language is like figurative language, dialogue, how detailed it is, if your characters are well explained, stuff like that, okay? And then, you know, like punctuation, capitalization, grammar, we obviously grade all of that too. And then the different columns on the rubric. Over here, this whole column right here is beginning. So that would be like a 1 point thing. 1 or 0 points, really, because some of it's like, oh yeah, you didn't even do that. Developing means, you know, you're developing your skills. Things are improving, but still need some work. Strong. That's great. You want to be a strong writer. That would be 3 points. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for. But exemplary, that's like above and beyond points, right? So, you know, if 4 on your report card is beyond standard. You've met the standard, you've gone past it, you're kicking its butt, okay? So obviously we all want to be in this 3 and 4 category. So look here at the 3, and then if you think like, oh yeah, I definitely did that, maybe I can add a little bit more and be a 4. That's what you want to try and do. But you want to avoid this level 1 column entirely, okay? So I'm going to highlight just the introduction parts because that's all we're looking at today. So just these top boxes. Just that. Ignore everything else on the page for right now. In fact, there. Okay. So for your introduction, we need to, let's look at the 3 to see what we need to do, okay? The main characters are described but may need more detail. So you need to describe your main characters. If you want a 4 for that category, your main characters would have to be memorable and clearly described. A 1, though, would say main characters are not described. So if you don't even describe your main characters, you're gonna get a 1 for that box. Level 2 would be the main characters are described, but details are unclear. So if I can't picture your main character, if I don't know their name or anything really about them, that'd be a 2. If they're described, but maybe you could have done more detail, that'll get you a 3, and that's still very good, okay? For setting, if it is creative and clearly described, you'll get 4 points. If it's described but needs more detail, 3 points. If it is described but needs more detail, or if the details are unclear, like if I can't picture it at all. And if you don't even describe your setting at all, 1 or 0, right? Because if you don't describe your characters, if you don't describe your setting, you may not even get 1 point, okay? And then an introduction also grabs the reader's attention with a hook, okay? So we've talked about hooks before in your introduction paragraphs, like your starter sentence in a paragraph should hook your reader. It needs to grab the attention of them so that they want to continue reading. So if the hook grabs the reader's attention somewhat effectively, like if it's pretty good, 3 points. If there's no hook at all, 1 point, okay? So really quick, what we're going to do is look just at the introduction, just the first paragraph in Treasure Island, and see if they include some of those things, okay? So just this first paragraph of chapter 1 on page 2 in Treasure Island. Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the other gentlemen have asked me to record the story of Treasure Island, keeping nothing back but the bearings, because there's still treasure there. Therefore, I take up my pen and go back to the time when my family ran the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the old seaman with the saber cut on his cheek came to stay with us. Okay, let's see. Main characters are described, so I know who the main characters are. There's a narrator, because it says I, Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, his family, and an old seaman with a saber cut on his cheek. Okay, so some details are still unclear. They're described, but maybe they need more detail, so I would give it a 3 or a 2. I don't really know who the narrator is yet. Okay, so in yours, you need to name who your person is and describe them. Setting. I know one of the settings is the Admiral Benbow Inn, and it also talks about Treasure Island. Okay, so setting is described, but it may need more detail. I don't know what countries we're talking about. I don't know where really we're at. So some of it's unclear. But it's good with a hook. It does grab the attention effectively because it's talking about Treasure Island and buried treasure still on this island. That makes me want to keep reading. That sounds exciting, right? Okay, so your introduction needs to introduce your main characters, and they should be memorable and very clearly described. Describe your setting in a lot of detail. Explain what this place is, what it looks like, and grab the attention of the readers somehow. Okay? Remember, the story is about your character stuck by themselves, probably by themselves. If you want to add more characters, that's up to you. But they're stranded somewhere, whatever your setting is, and they want to try and get back home or survive whatever situation they're in. Okay? So today, this is all we're worrying about, just the introduction. Okay, so hopefully you took home, you either took home your notebooks or they were sent home to you when your teachers had to clean out your gross desks and send everything home. Well, we put it in bags and you guys came to pick it up a while ago. So hopefully you have notebooks or lined paper or scratch paper to write your introduction on. If you do not, there's this page right here is a blank page. Unfortunately, in this workbook, there's no creative space pages in the back. There's no just writing space pages. So we're just going to use some of these blank pages. So you can write it here or on the back of the rubric page right here. There is a mostly blank page. This just has information about punctuation and stuff. So you can write it on either of those pages if you want. Okay. It needs to be one paragraph introduction. So one paragraph is at least how many sentences? 5 sentences. Okay. Hook your reader. I'm your reader, by the way. Your teacher is your reader. Hook your reader. Introduce characters. Introduce setting. So this is going to be the first paragraph of your adventure story. It has to be at least 5 sentences, and you need to do these things. Write it here on this page, page 70, or on page 72, or scratch paper, line paper, notebook, whatever you have. Do not lose it though. We have to add to it. Okay, so if it's on a piece of loose paper, put it in your workbook and then close the page on that paper. Close the workbook like on it so that you don't lose it, okay? Let me know if you guys have any questions. See you in the next video. Happy writing.